Hillel Neuer, thanks for joining us. You're with UN Watch. Last month, the UN General Assembly voted to have a commission, a permanent commission of inquiry at the United Nations. What's your response to that?
Well, it's sad. You know, the United Nations did hold an urgent session on the Taliban after they took over Afghanistan, and one expected them to adopt a commission of inquiry to hold the Taliban to account for massive human rights violations affecting tens, hundreds of thousands of people, but they declined to do anything in that commission, in that urgent session that they held. There was no commission of inquiry, no investigation. And instead, you have the UN dedicating millions of dollars to targeting one single country, Israel. And keep in mind, this is not something to support peace, human rights, or justice. This is something to empower Hamas. We've seen it before. Hamas is the first supporter of these commissions of inquiry. We know that this inquiry, as you mentioned, it is unlimited in its scope. It has budgeted for millions of dollars. It's unique in that regard, that it has no limit in scope. It is going to look both at the hostilities that happened in May, but also at so-called systematic discrimination, which we know for certain, I would say, that they intend to be accusing Israel of the blood libel of apartheid, to accuse Israel alone of being a racist state.
Is a commission like this with an extended or unlimited proviso, is this unprecedented in UN history?
As far as I know, I'm not aware of a commission of inquiry at the Human Rights Council that has been unlimited. It is certainly not the norm. Even the ones against Israel, which have been very severe, have lasted 6 months or a year. This one is mandated to report every single year, both to the Human Rights Council in Geneva and to the General Assembly in New York City. And the fact that they're going to be looking at not only the recent hostilities in Gaza, which they've done before on numerous occasions, but also looking into so-called discrimination. And the other issue, of course, is who they've selected. They've named 3 commissioners. The chair of the inquiry is Navi Pillay. She was the former UN human rights chief. She has said that Israel treats international law with, quote, perpetual disdain. She has also accused Israel of being an apartheid state. So she's meant to be the impartial chair of this inquiry. It's a farce.
You talked about them calling Israel an apartheid state. What is your response when people label Israel apartheid?
Well, I think it's basically a new form of demonizing the Jewish people. Throughout history, the way of targeting the Jews was to accuse them of whatever was deemed virtuous by society at the time. When society was religious, Jews were accused of killing God. When society in the Soviet Union was communist, Jews were accused of being the ultimate capitalists or nationalists. When in capitalist societies, those who hated the Jews accused them of being communists. And today, at the United Nations and in many parts of the world, the ultimate virtue is anti-racism. And so Israel is being accused of being a racist state. It is not the case. In Israel, there are minorities, and like everywhere, minorities have issues. And there's a war between Israel and the Arabs. So obviously the Arab minority, there are issues affecting the Arab minority that need to be addressed. But significantly, unlike apartheid South Africa, the Arabs in Israel vote. They are elected. The current coalition government in its cabinet of ministers includes and indeed relies upon an Arab Islamic party. So it is really absurd for anyone, and I've been to South Africa and I've studied apartheid, to make that comparison is really not only an insult to Israel, but it's an insult to the victims of real apartheid in South Africa, where blacks could not vote, could not be elected. In Israel, Arabs are on the Supreme Court. If you go to a hospital in Israel, Arabs are both the patients and they're also the doctors, they're the pharmacists. So, you know, again, there are problems in Israel, but to call it an apartheid state is demonizing language. It's absurd, and it's the modern form of anti-Semitism. Let's be very clear about that.
How would you like to see other nations respond to this? I believe 125 nations have signed on to this, but how would you like to see the U.S. and perhaps European nations respond?
Well, look, the initial vote for the inquiry happened in May. The Human Rights Council voted to establish the inquiry, and they got a thin majority. I believe the number was something like 24 out of 47 countries that voted to create the inquiry. Not a single Western nation voted for the inquiry, no EU countries. The vote that happened now is really a budgetary vote where Israel tried sort of at the last minute to remove the budget for the inquiry, and that failed. And there are a number of countries, including Canada and Australia, that said that they absolutely opposed the inquiry, but that they voted for that they abstained on the budgetary issue because they felt that it wasn't the place to vote on substance issues. And so I think a number of countries that approved the recent budget for the inquiry did so more as a matter of process. However, your question is, what do we expect? The United States took the floor. They did vote against giving a budget to this inquiry. And they did say that in Geneva, and the United States has just joined the Human Rights Council 12 days ago in Geneva. I will be meeting with the United States representatives in Geneva, and I will be urging them to act on what they promised. They said that they will work to persuade other countries that this inquiry is a bad idea. We need to rally a majority of countries, and indeed we're very far from it now, but we need to rally a majority of countries to understand that demonizing Israel, demonizing the Jewish people, does not advance the cause of Palestinians, does not advance the cause of peace in the Middle East. We do know that in the region, when any country has come forward to make peace, whether it's been Egypt's Anwar Sadat, Jordan's King Hussein, the United Arab Emirates, Morocco, Sudan, Israel has responded with peace agreements, normalization agreements, and the same goes with the Palestinians. There were certain measures that we thought would bring peace. So far, we're seeing hostile attitudes towards peace agreements, but the bashing Israel at the United Nations, demonizing Israel, is only going to polarize people in the region. It's not going to bring them together. I wish that the Palestinians and their supporters, including those in the West, including groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, which support these kinds of measures, I wish they would look to what Arabs like the United Arab Emirates, like Morocco, like Bahrain are doing, reaching out towards Israelis, extending the hand of peace. Jews and Arabs, Muslims and Jews, Israelis and Arabs can come together in the Middle East if there is a will. And the United Nations should be on the right side of making peace, not on the wrong side of increasing polarization.
Yeah, you mentioned you're going to be meeting with U.S. representatives. I understand the Trump administration pulled out of the UN Human Rights Council. Now the Biden administration is coming back in. Which way do you think would be better for Israel?
Well, it really depends what the U.S. does there. We're not opposed to the U.S. being at UN bodies. We believe the U.S. has a vital voice. When Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan was the U.S. ambassador in 1975 and the General Assembly adopted the infamous Zionism is Racism resolution, he gave one of the greatest speeches in UN history. And I urge everyone to listen to it, to read it. They can go on our website, unwatch.org, and find that Moynihan speech. That was an example of when U.S. presence, even though the U.S. couldn't stop the resolution, the U.S. going on the record and speaking out for what is right, what is moral, what is correct for democracy and true human rights and against bias and anti-Semitism really means a lot. So if the U.S. does the right thing on the Human Rights Council, we're not opposed to them being there. The problem is that historically, in recent years, administrations that have joined the council have kind of bought into the whole package and have cheered on the council, become its champions and cheerleaders, and have looked away at some of its abuses. So we hope that the United States will not do that now. We hope that they will call out the absurdity of members on the council like Cuba, China, Russia, Venezuela, Libya, just elected the vice president of the council. The United States needs to call this out. The United States needs to ask why the Human Rights Council is silent when there's massacres of protesters in Kazakhstan or in China, what they're doing in Hong Kong. Complete silence from the Human Rights Council. And this targeting of Israel, demonization of the Jewish people, the United States needs to call this out. So look, we're going to give this administration a chance, and we hope they'll do the right thing. And in a year's time, let's come back and let's look at what they've done. And if they've been truth tellers and if they've used that unique podium for good, then it will be a good thing.
Yeah. And as you say, Hillel, there's no commission of inquiry against the Taliban, against Iran, China, and its abuses as well.
No.
Any final thoughts about what people really need to know about this situation at the UN?
Well, look, the United Nations is not going away. The U.S. is not going to leave it. George W. Bush and John Bolton didn't leave it. The Trump administration didn't leave the UN. The UN is there to stay. And the U.S. is going to be a part of it. We need to urge our representatives, whether it's the United States or other countries, to do the right thing, to take a principled stand, to hold the worst dictatorships to account. You mentioned China, Iran, Russia, Cuba, Venezuela. Most of these countries have never had a single investigation or inquiry. That's wrong. The U.S. needs to take leadership. We need to press our representatives, our presidents, our secretaries of state to speak out and stand up for the right thing.
Well, thank you, Hillel, for your analysis and for your time right now. Thank you.